So let's take a look at neo-Marxism. So again, a development of traditional Marxist theories, which you may have already looked at. So neo-Marxism is a form of Marxism, so it's macro, structural, conflict, and modern theory. The main thing about neo-Marxism is it's based on traditional Marxist ideas of inequality and exploitation. However, it does accuse traditional Marxism of being too economically deterministic, which means it focuses too much on money and the economy. They believe there is an element of separation between the economic base and the superstructure. So if we use our boat analogy again, this red line between the economic base, the infrastructure, and the superstructure is what neo-Marxism says exists. The two are not fixed together. What this means is that ideological state apparatus can go against the infrastructure and they can shape society in their own way rather than just reinforcing the values of the economic base. And if we're thinking about this in the house analogy, if society was a building, capitalism would still be the infrastructure, which shapes the way that society operates or which way the house looks to some extent, but the superstructure has a degree of autonomy, therefore it can take a different shape. The walls, the windows, the doors can be placed in different areas of the house. So they can shape themselves around the framework rather than relying on it, which is obviously a difference from traditional Marxism. Now, the main neo-Marxist we have is Gramsci. And now Gramsci argues that ideology is actually separate from the economy. So all these ideological state apparatus in the top half of the boat are separate from the economy. And he argues that ideology can actually be more influential than money. So it allows the working class to gain power. The best way we've seen this is when we've looked at religion. And Gramsci's idea of obviously hegemonic ideologies, and then this developed into like theories of liberation theology from Maduro and Althusser, and how religion is a force for change, how religion can change society and work independently from the economic base, rather than in traditional Marxism where religion just reinforces the economic base. So Gramsci called this hegemonic ideology, and what hegemonic means is that it's the dominant ideology, but it's not fixed and it's not permanent. So it's only dominant because the proletariat don't see any other alternative other than in traditional Marxism where it is locked in place. And I will explain that in the next slide. So if we were to subscribe to Gramsci's view, the solution to capitalism, the solution to inequality, isn't to overthrow capitalism and remove the economic system, but to make the working class aware of their exploitation so that they then challenge the system and break capitalism through collective action. Exactly what we saw in religious movements like Martin Luther King and segregation, Desmond Tutu in the apartheid, the Burmese monks. So these actions of religion making the classes aware of their exploitation and leading. So let's take a look at traditional Marxism in this sense before we compare it to neo-Marxism. So in traditional Marxism, you can see here the dominant ideology is locked, it's fixed, and the people who have locked it are the ruling class. They have locked the dominant ideology in place, and that dominant ideology is capitalism. Now what you can see here is the thoughts, the ideas of the dominant ideology are shaping social institutions. That's family, education, religion, and media, and then that's filtering those messages down to the working classes, and that's what we'd call the false class consciousness. Exactly the same process we saw in our boat analogy. Now, in critical Marxism, which is Gramsci, or another word for neo-Marxism, you can see that the dominant ideology is not locked, it's open. And because of that, it can change. So, in a normal situation, we've got the ruling class, their ideas would filter down and shape society and create the false consciousness. But in this example, if the working class are made aware of their exploitation and unequal treatment in society, they gain class consciousness, then they can change the dominant ideology. As a result, all the institutions change and the working class become aware of their exploitation. And that's where the dominant ideology can change. That's the main difference here. Traditional Marxism, the dominant ideology is fixed. The only way to change society is through revolution, overthrow the capitalist economy. In critical Marxism, neo-Marxism, you just need to change the thoughts and attitudes. that ideology is not dominant, it's not fixed, and it is subject to change. Just as again, a wider comparison, it might be a little bit more confusing here, but we've got our original boat analogy at the top with the superstructure, infrastructure at the top. And then we've got the traditional Marxism, which we just talked about. So we can kind of ignore that. Neo-Marxism, Gramsci, talks about coercion and consent. So again, that dominant ideology is locked. And there's this concept of relative autonomy between the two institutions. That's key. And then in the middle, you've got Althusser, who talked about relative autonomy between the infrastructure and the economy, but he also added in a third layer, the political level, which is also part of the superstructure. So again, they all have relative autonomy, but the idea that all three of these can influence one another or work independently of another. And that would be kind of politics and government level as part of the superstructure. So again, slightly longer introduction to neo-Marxism, but hopefully this has helped clarify some of their views. Thanks for watching.